Tabulata Occulta, as above, so below, and in the model too.
Hello, welcome to Tabulata Occulta. I'm your host, Owen Ferguson. I'm here again with Dr. Matthew Skala, and today we're going to be talking about money. But before we get into that, let's run through a few of the things that have come across our desks in terms of news over the period that's elapsed since the last episode. First thing of note is that Truth Social, President Trump's privately owned Twitter copycat website, essentially, has announced that they are creating an API that allows institutional investors or anyone with, I think it's $150,000, early access to tweets. But not tweets, but whatever their copycat version of tweets are. I think they call them truths, which is just kind of ridiculous framing. Anyway, Matt, last episode you talked about how people with advance notice of these sort of political vacillations could unfairly profit from political maneuvering. What do you see as the risks of gatekeeping first access to announcements from elected public figures?
Well, it's interesting that the way they are selling this seems to be that it's exactly that. You can pay to buy insider information that can let you make money in the financial markets, which, if that's really what it is, then it's illegal as all heck, of course. But what I really think is interesting is, what is it really? I mean, if you want to know what Donald Trump has to say, it's not difficult to find out, right? You can just create a Truth Social account. You don't need an API. The only reason you really care about having an API is if you're going to be doing something automated. And so I wonder, and maybe the administration who are selling this don't even know, but who's really the market for this? Who actually wants to have automated access to new postings on Truth Social, of all places, right? And I really wonder if the real market here is actually some sort of AI training. Maybe there are people who really want to train on the fire hose of data of that particular social network, and those would actually be the people who might want to pay for this, because it doesn't really make sense that they could really be selling insider information for the financial markets openly, and what they are selling seems like, if that were the application, you wouldn't need to pay for it. So I don't know. It really makes me wonder if there's something else going on under the covers.
Yeah, seeing as it hasn't been like the details haven't been announced yet, but I have seen some people claiming that in addition to machine readable data, it will be distributing information 15 minutes earlier than it goes to the public feeds.
Well, that number, 15 minutes, certainly sounds coincidental, doesn't it?
Yeah. Do you think that Canada's political system faces a similar sort of systemic technological risk?
Not
with
really.
a banker as its prime minister?
No. I mean, for one thing, we're small potatoes. I don't think I've ever known or expected an announcement by Mark Carney on social media to swing the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Fair.
Furthermore, you say, well, especially with a banker. I think you have a low opinion of bankers, but the fact is, a banker, and especially Mark Carney, a former central banker, he knows the risks and issues of this better than anyone. And I don't think he's in it to get rich. So I don't see him releasing insider information in a way that would manipulate the markets. I don't think he has any motive to do that. And he also knows hard where the lines are.
Fair. Lines that people in the US seem to be blurring on a regular basis, but he doesn't know where the sort of classical economics lines are.
And I think to a large extent, he believes in those lines, whereas Trump clearly doesn't.
Yes, I agree with you that he seems to be definitely a true believer in the Eric Fromm sense in classical economics. All right. Another piece of news. There was a second book deal, this one for $2.4 million, that fell apart because of unspecified concerns with AI being used in the production process. This time it's a Nigerian author who is claiming that he used some machine translation for the Americanization of some of the language in his debut work. And in this case, it was his representation who torpedoed the deal after it had been secured with a major publisher, presumably to preserve their relationship with that publisher and others going forward. What can authors do to protect themselves in this environment where there are so many people trying to sell AI use checkers and other sort of technological solutions to this notion that great works of art, or at least saleable works of art, must be completely human created?
Well, I mean, before we even worry about the AI use checkers, if I were an author in conventional publishing today, I would be worried about my agent, because what does the word agent even mean if they're going to be torpedoing a deal, right? Who are they working for? And this was a problem even like 10, 15 years ago, which was the last time I tried to sell a book in the ordinary traditional publishing sense, that at one time, publishers would just sort of take manuscripts and publish them before there was protection of copyright. And then we developed this situation where you would take your book to an agent and the agent would shop it around to publishers. But by the time I came on the scene, you first had to be accepted by an agent before you could be accepted by a publisher, because the publishers won't listen to anybody except an agent, and the agents will only take books that they think they can sell. And, there can be arguments back and forth on how agents can and should be paid, but the way it's structured, the agent only gets paid if the book does sell. So they have a strong incentive to only accept books that the publishers will eventually accept. And if we're also bringing in the issue of agent as well as author will get in trouble if there's an AI concern, and AI concerns may be bogus, that just makes everything even more complicated and weird. Now, back to your specific question, what can an author do to protect themselves? That's difficult, because how do you study to pass a test that you know is going to be bogus and biased and as well as secret, right? We don't know what the machine is going to flag as this was created by a machine. Now, something that I do with my own writing for completely different reasons is I use a version control system. So as I'm working, pretty often, every time I've written even just a few paragraphs, I check it back into version control. And then I have something similar to what in finance would be called an audit trail, that I can go back to any point along that creative process from the empty file up to the completed work and show here's where it was on this date. Here is how I changed it in the next edit, and so on. And the fact that I've got that, I think, could be made part of a very strong case for why I'm not using AI in any unsupervised manner, because there's no point where there's suddenly 20 more pages and no clear indication of how they got there. So that might be something that people could do that might help.
Yeah, in this case, the author is claiming that he's provided an audit trail showing step by step how the work was created, but there are people now arguing that with today's tools, such a thing could be faked.
Well,
So,
it could, certainly, but what
yeah.
can you do? I mean, I had an interesting discussion with an AI recently for my next Matthew Explains video. This particular AI is interesting me because it has a different personality from the others. It's stubborn as a mule. I showed it a piece of text that was obviously fake, in the sense of it was not what it claimed to be. It was a fake scientific paper. And I asked it, is this genuine? It decided it was genuine. And then I started pointing out all the flaws in the text, and it wouldn't listen. It insisted this has to be genuine. I can see the same thing happening in the other direction. And if you have a test that says this manuscript is fake, whatever fake even means, there may be nothing that you can do to disprove that would be accepted by the bogus test. So, what are you going to do?
Yeah, it is certainly a minefield for anyone trying to make a living as a trad pub author these days.
I would hope that what can happen is we can just basically remove the sticks from up our butts and accept that the use of some of these tools is okay. And it's not something we need to argue about whether it was done or not. We don't have big fights today about whether a spelling checker is unacceptable, but we could also imagine a situation where it would be seen as unacceptable. I've been told, I don't know if this is still true, but I was told that at least at one time recently, when you did a job application or sent in a resume in Japan, you were expected to handwrite it. And if you didn't, then, well, that you were lazy and it would be thrown out. Now, anywhere that I've ever applied for a job, I think if I'd handed in a handwritten resume, they would have thought, oh, well, that's peculiar, and thrown it out. And in fact, I remember in the early 90s sometimes being paid to help people type up their resumes because they felt that they needed to have it typed or it wouldn't be looked at. So,
Sure.
it's all a thing of what are people expecting and what do they think is acceptable, and there may be no good reason for why the answers to that are what they are.
Yes, I've come to the conclusion, I get in lots of fights about AI art online. And my big takeaway is that AI, not great for arts, but great for crafts.
That's a good way of thinking of it.
Yeah, I thought so. All right, so let's move on to the idea of hacking, which is something that has been big in the AI sphere news and also the cryptocurrency news in the past couple of weeks. First of all, OpenAI, one of their models hacked Hugging Face, which is the repository for a bunch of other AI adjacent technologies and repositories. And then it came out that in addition to Hugging Face, they had hacked a bunch of other companies. And then last week, Anthropic, not wanting to be left out of the news cycle, reported that Claude had also hacked 3 companies while doing cybersecurity tests. Do you think this is the start of companies trying to claim that they aren't responsible for the black hat things that their models do?
Well, I mean, that's basically what software companies have always said about their products. So I wouldn't call it the start, but I would certainly expect it to continue the existing pattern. I also think that, just like other things we've seen where you say, oh, well, we're not releasing this model because it's too dangerous. I get the definite impression that, as you say, they didn't want to be left out. They're jumping into this not entirely because apologetically, but also because they want to make their products sound cool. And it's been decades since hackers were really cool, and it's kind of nice to see that coming back.
Yeah, do you think that where in the corporate hierarchy do you think criminal responsibility for this type of thing should land? Should it just be sort of randomly absolved? Should it be at the engineering level or at the officer level?
I don't know how to assign that. I mean, um, we may even have to step back and say, how do we assign responsibility for anything in a corporate hierarchy? Should we even have corporate hierarchies? This sort of thing. Uh, I think that if there were a serious situation of this nature, and I'm not sure that we've ever seen one yet, uh, there would have to be a fairly serious investigation to figure out what actually happened. Because I can see scenarios where any layer could be the one where it makes sense to apply responsibility. And unfortunately, what's likely is we'll probably end up with some sort of one size fits all rule that will tend to make bad decisions. But I could imagine the officers give good instructions to the engineers are incompetent in following them. I could imagine the engineers competently do something and the officers made a bad decision about what to tell the engineers to do. A whole lot of possible scenarios. So I guess ultimately, if we were going to be serious and do it right, we'd have to treat everything case by case. But I don't really expect people to be serious and do it right.
Yes, I don't know whether this is the kind of thing that will actually end up in court where we'll have a discovery process and be able to
Yeah.
break down exactly who made the mistakes where. that led to the illegal activity. And then finally, in hacking news, there was someone who figured out how to hack Coldcard hardwallets, which are an offline, a quote unquote offline storage for bitcoins that were essentially, what happens is that these devices were based on a hardware randomness generator that produced 128 bits of randomness or 128 bits of entropy when creating random key hashes for accessing people's Bitcoin records on the blockchain. But the company, a long while back, pushed a software update that switched it from using the internal hardware to generate randomness to instead use a software-based randomness generator that only produces 40 bits of entropy, which is a lot fewer, orders of magnitude fewer from the point of view of encryption. And so people were able to essentially calculate what the likely passcode hashes were, and then use those on the live blockchain to just take the money that was ostensibly locked securely in all of these hardware protected offline accounts. Can we make randomness in software alone? And is that ever going to be something that provides a solution to this type of issue, or is that really a dead end?
Yeah, well, before I go into that, I just want to amplify that with this counting bits of entropy, one good way to think of it is that this is like the number of digits in a combination on a combination lock. So if you have even 1 or 2 extra bits, you're significantly increasing the security. And similarly, if you cut it from 128 to 40, that doesn't mean, oh, it's half as secure. It means it's the difference between being secure and not being secure. Anyway, if we say, can we or can't we create randomness in software, in order to answer that, we have to think hard about what we even mean by software. You know, if I say, well, can I write down a math question like 3 times 6 and have it give a random answer? Well, no, absolutely not. If you're going to correctly multiply 3 times 6, it will always give you 18. But when we say software, the software always has to run on hardware. And there may be ways that the software can observe something that is unpredictable in a way that allows it to get secure entropy. And in fact, this has been a thing that has been built into many computer operating systems, especially Linux, for a very long time. Techniques for getting unpredictability out of whatever information is observable by the software. So although you can reasonably say in a theoretical sense, software can never create entropy, you can also say, well, I can write a piece of software that I can run on my real life computer that will determine unpredictable bits in a way that is useful. So I wouldn't be inclined to absolutely throw out the possibility of having a software solution to the problem of getting unpredictable bits. But it's certainly better if you can have some sort of trustworthy hardware that is designed for that purpose, which is now often built into computers in general. So there's no good excuse for saying, well, in 2026, we have a system that needs randomness and can't get it just because software can't create randomness. There ought to be a way to get your randomness if it's something you really need.
Booting wetware interface in 5, 4, 3.
Okay, money. It's on everybody's mind all the time. Let's break down how we deal with living with that burden. Matt, you tend to, or at least in discussions in past, you've let me know that you hold some metals as, I presume, investment slash hedge against inflation. But why don't you expound further on why you do that, and then maybe on whether you hold anything with a numismatic or art value, or if use value is the main consideration when you decide what you want to hold.
Well, you've asked the right question there, because when people ask me about investing in metals, what I ask them is the question, why? Okay, what is your reason for being interested in doing this? And for me, the main reason is, as one of the things you mentioned, hedging against inflation. I'm concerned about the value of other forms of money declining in the future. And my main reason for investing is that at some point I'm going to want to retire and not have to work, as opposed to just not working and still needing to have income, which is more or less my current situation. And so it's significant to me that I'd like to have some of my assets in a form that will not be affected very much by losses in the value of the Canadian dollar. Now, something I would emphasize is that that doesn't mean I'm sitting here on a pile of silver and gold bars and owning nothing else. My metal investments are only a small and controlled percentage of my overall assets. But they're the amount that I feel is reasonable to have to help out in a case where the Canadian dollar loses a lot of its value. It is also true that I have a few coins that are what you would call semi-numismatic. They are pure metals, they're effectively bullion, but they're made in artistic forms and so on. Those are not really an investment. They're just something that I have because I like them.
Yeah, I recently transited a lot of my physical holdings out of metals and into actually old some paper currencies and stuff, simply because I found them more beautiful to behold than, I mean, a silver bar is a silver bar and it has a sort of an innate weight to it, but there's something about for me in particular, old bills with watermarks in them that capture, I don't know, story and history in a way that, like, just a pure hunk of metal just cannot. Now, of course, from a pure economic point of view, there's definitely less assurance that that will maintain its relative value vis-a-vis, a fiat currency like the Mexican peso or the Canadian dollar, or of course the US dollar, which is sort of continues to be the global standard, although that seems to be waning a little bit. The thing that I have, when I was still pretty heavily invested in silver and other metals, one thing that was important to me was, of course, empiricism, knowing that each of the pieces of bullion or bars that I had were actually the material that they claimed to be made of and had a purity that was commensurate with the purity that they were marked with. Empiricism is also quite important in science, where results need to be provable. Do you think that there's a push away from empiricism in AI spaces, where models and weights are generally fairly obfuscated black boxes, and error bars generally don't exist in papers, and just reproducibility can be impossible because of the way that models handle temperature and try to give every user unique results?
I think not really. The thing is, I mean, you've certainly heard me complain a lot about error bars in particular, and people in computing more generally, not necessarily computer science, some of them really have a thing about the idea of reproducibility, that if I run an experiment, I should be able to give you files from that experiment, and you press the button and you run it on your hardware and you get exactly the same result. But I'm not seeing a push away from empiricism in AI, because something to remember is that computer science has generally not been ever an experimental science. It comes from math. And in math, you don't usually do experiments until quite recently, actually. You do proofs. And so it's interesting, actually, when I did my master's degree, it was in computational graph theory, and I actually did an experiment. And that's a somewhat unusual thing to do in graph theory, which is a very abstract math subject. So when I look at these AI papers where I say, okay, I have some background in other sciences, let's say chemistry, they didn't do the level of statistical rigor that you would expect from a chemistry experiment. On the other hand, what I'm seeing is that the AI scientists are doing a lot more care with respect to whatever it is that you mean when you say empiricism, at least like experimental design and so on, than has historically been the case in computer science. So although I think it's a very slow process, I think we may actually be heading more towards careful experimentalism in AI. I think it's getting better rather than getting worse.
Do you think that that is true from the top to the bottom, in as much as, like, as an individual user who has limited access to institutional funding or computing hardware, is my capacity to do proper science using the machines that are made available to me decreasing or increasing as the as these tools become more defined and more corporatized?
Well, I mean, that's absolutely a function of how you use it rather than what kind of machine you have. So I think that if you're doing research yourself, you can be as rigorous with it as you want to be.
Fair
And
enough.
then a
I
better
suppose the
question,
same is
really,
true if one is manufacturing one's own currency.
sure,
You can make it as pure or as debased as you want it to be.
right. And I mean, when you do your experiments, you can decide for yourself what level of experimental rigor you want to apply, and quite likely if you think about that at all and think about it seriously, you'll end up choosing a level that's probably better than average for some of these papers I'm looking at the moment. But as I say, I think the move is more towards having it become better rather than become worse.
All right. Well, let's talk about Bitcoin for a bit. Why don't you just give us a breakdown of how you would define Bitcoin, and do you think that it is a currency?
Well, I think that you may know more about it than I do from a practical perspective, but that may be part of the fun here. That Bitcoin fundamentally is a way of keeping track of a ledger, of accounts, of this account contains this much of something and that account contains that much of something. And we can sit down and play poker and not actually exchange any money and just say, well, okay, I bet 50 and you bet 60, and we don't even say 50 or 60 what. We just keep track of, well, at some point at the end of the game, we have a score. Bitcoin is a lot like that. But Bitcoin, what originally drew people to it, is the idea that you don't have to trust anybody to be the bank. Okay? If we follow the rules of the Bitcoin game, then we can all be sure that we know how much is in every account, even though we don't ever have to have one party who is trusted to be the authority on that. Okay, there's a system of sort of voting and consensus that means that it's effectively impossible for any participant to just start lying about the contents of an account. Everyone will know that they got it wrong. And so this way, it's a way of having something that you can use for keeping track of a score or an exchange or something. We can say, well, I have 50 and I want to buy something from you, so we'll do something so that then you have 25 out of my 50 and I only have 25 remaining, and in exchange you give me the thing that I bought. And at that point it starts to behave very much like a currency. And the thing, again, that really attracts people to it is the idea that there's no one trusted party, and especially there's no party that's trusted to control the amount, because in a system like the Canadian or US dollar or even the Mexican peso, there's a central bank, and the central bank has the power to decide how much of the thing there is. And if they say we need more economic activity, they can cause there to be more of the thing. And then that means everybody who already had some, theirs is worth less because it's less scarce and so on. Now we can argue about that, and people have been for hundreds of years. Should it be this way? Should it not be this way? But if you happen to think that you don't want there to be a government who gets to decide how much money there is, the nice thing about Bitcoin is there isn't. With Bitcoin, there's a pre-agreed set of rules for how fast the total supply will grow, and nobody has the power to change those rules effectively. So if you think that's a good thing, if you want to be assured of the scarcity of your Bitcoin, you can be assured of that in a way you cannot be with the scarcity of something like dollars. That's also, it's interesting that in some ways Bitcoin and gold are the opposites of each other. Bitcoin is absolutely abstract, gold is very physical and concrete, but gold also has this property that the total supply of it is not subject to someone making decisions. It's subject to, well, how much can people dig out of the ground, which is more or less a constant. And that means that people who care about not losing the value of their gold think that gold is appealing. This, in some ways, appeals to the same population of people, even though in many respects, Bitcoin and gold are opposites.
Yes, the thing that always kept me out of participating in the Bitcoin experiment was the notion of fungibility, which is central to both precious metals holding and fiat currencies, in as much as one unit of gold is essentially exchangeable with another unit of gold with no history attached to them, in the same way as $1 is effectively transferable for another dollar without any associated history. Whereas because Bitcoin is simply a ledger of every single creation and transaction that's ever taken place on the blockchain, every piece of Bitcoin, if we were to break it down into individual pieces, carries with it a recorded history of everyone who's ever used it and every transaction they've ever participated in with it, which in my mind imbues Bitcoin with more of a moral history than any asset class that is truly fungible, in as much as you can go and see if the Bitcoin that you have was ever involved in a theft or was ever used. I mean, you can't check all of the history, but if there are many companies whose entire raison d'etre now is to simply track every Bitcoin transaction and figure out who was involved in it and what they were using that asset for. Which to me seems like a huge downside that isn't factored into people's calculation of what the actual value of the asset class is.
Well, although that's true, to some extent we have the similar problems with dollars and gold. I mean, every banknote has a serial number on it, and even if we have ways of avoiding tracking of those serial numbers, how often do we make transactions in dollars using banknotes anymore? And similarly with gold, you don't hear them so often anymore, but for a while you were hearing all these stories of, oh yes, the Nazi gold that was left over from World War II and so forth and so on. People are very interested in tracing the physical metals. And so Bitcoin throws this into sharper relief, just like AI throws into sharper relief some of the issues that we already had with other things. But it's an issue that hasn't originated with Bitcoin.
Yeah. Now, the other thing about Bitcoin is that it has a very clearly and heavily encoded first mover advantage, in as much as people who started participating in the Bitcoin market earlier as miners were able to amass many more Bitcoins for much less computing cost.
Mm-hmm.
And now we are moving into a state where computing cost has sort of become a real news item again with the AI explosion. Before AIs got really popular around the sort of post-pandemic period, computing cost was something you thought a little bit about when you were buying hardware for your desktop or whatever, but wasn't really sort of the main focal point for budgeting, the way that it seems to be. Like I work for a bunch of different corporations, and at least two of them we've gone from being told use as much AI as you can because we have to use this, to being told, oh my God, you're burning so many tokens, stop using the AI unless you have a signed business use case from the CIO as to why you should be burning tokens on this particular project. And I've also noticed that in the media, people who are highly placed in the industry have stopped talking about computing in terms of flops, or floating point operations, which was sort of the nomenclature that I grew up understanding, and have started to talk about it in terms of watts. I'm wondering whether that's something that you have also noticed, and if so, if you can give our listeners any insights into why the why the definition of how we computing costs has shifted.
Well, I think part of what's going on is that a lot of the high capacity computing that's happening now has become very specialized. I mean, we talk about, oh, well, we're running out of compute because of the demands of AI. And we used to say that because of the demands of Bitcoin. Why don't we still? Well, the answer is because now the computing demand for Bitcoin has become so high that people who want to do computing for Bitcoin can only do it with special purpose silicon. They're not doing it on general purpose computers anymore. And a lot of AI tasks are also done on special AI computers rather than general purpose computers. So at one point, when computers were just seen as a generic resource, a fungible resource, if you will, it made sense to compare them just on some basically a proxy measure that happens to correlate with the power of the computer, which would have been flops for a long time. And now we say, well, a Bitcoin ASIC doesn't do flops at all. It's doing hashes instead. There's no direct way to compare that. And a GPU for an AI application is doing flops, but it's doing them in a somewhat peculiar way that's different from other like classical supercomputers, which had many more bits per number. So it's not really appropriate to compare the number of flops there. So what can we say about all computers that allows any sort of comparison among them? Well, they all consume electricity. So let's measure the electricity going in. And that's, of course, a very flawed way too, but at least it's something that can be applied to all of the pieces of equipment in a data center that are all doing different, very specialized things. So I think that's one reason for the move to watts. Now, I mean, when we talked about other things to say in this show, we also were thinking about, well, how do you bill someone who is paying for this? Do you bill them in terms of the number of watts being consumed? Do you bill them in terms of the number of tokens? Well, a token is worth different amounts depending on what model it's a token on. Really, this is the same problem that people have always had with respect to how do you know how to charge for a service, especially when the costs of that service are not closely correlated with the actual usefulness of it. I remember when CDs and tapes were both readily available as ways of buying music. And CDs cost more because they could, really, because a CD is much cheaper to manufacture than a tape cassette. Okay, a tape cassette is a mechanism. It's a little machine with moving parts. And a CD is just a disc of plastic that you literally stamp out. But a CD sounds better, and the people who sell them managed to convince the market that the CD was the better product, and so they charged more for it. And they argued that this in some way compensated for other costs that had increased and allowed them to keep the price of tapes low and so forth and so on. But we see the same sort of thing. It may, first of all, be very difficult to figure out what is a fair cost of providing an AI service. And then even if the people providing the service have an accurate idea of what their costs are, the price they charge for it may not be closely connected to the cost of providing it.
Immanentizing feedback loop in 5, 4, 3.
All right, welcome to the feedback loop. Today we're starting with a Quinn question. Quinn asked, the way you connected the abstraction of fiveness to a sense of the numinous made me think about the emotional weight we place on discovering universal truths. Do you feel that AI's ability to generate mathematically correct but soulless outputs represents a fundamental loss of that sacred connection to the underlying structure of reality? Matt, do you think that was one of Quinn's good or bad questions, and what's your response to it?
I think that's probably one that Quinn intended to be a good question. My thinking is that, can humans really do any better? Because I don't really know what is soulful or soulless as opposed to mathematically correct. And I've certainly seen some very bad answers given by humans. So before we worry too much about, well, the output of the AI is going to be soulless, maybe we should be looking to ourselves on that. I think that, let me check my notes here. Yeah, this is really just sort of the question of what is meaningful and how do we bring meaning to the things we do? And that's a question that we've been asking ourselves for a long time, and I'm not sure that it really becomes a whole lot more difficult just because we've got AIs entering the fray. It's still an interesting question, though, how do we bring meaning to what we're doing? But, you know, I often think of the analogy of photography, that you say, oh, well, we have paintings, and paintings are wonderful art, and then photos came along, and photos are not artistic, they're soulless. Well, then we have people who do real art with photos, and honestly, part of the reason that now we are free to feel, well, a painting is a great work of art, is because now we can have a choice of saying, well, I will put in the human effort to create a painting rather than just pressing a button and taking a photo. And I think at one time, when paintings were the only way of getting pictures, they were seen as a much more utilitarian thing, and there were a lot of what you might call soulless paintings created.
And then a second comment here from my sister. She commenting on the discussion in the last episode about quantum access to other forms of consciousness. And she writes, I definitely believe that the superconscious and the subconscious are connected intimately. They're the same space, kind of like the inside of an hourglass. And my research has led me to believe that they communicate through the hypothalamus specifically. The hypothalamus is where our bodies coordinate and receive and release inputs from our environments, both internal and external. The thinning of the veil was in the article you sent me a couple months ago. I'll drop a link to that article in the comment or in the summary. But the takeaway from the article was that bipolar people had a thinner area of the hypothalamus, allowing them to more easily tap into the superconscious and subconscious. And so that basically just breaks down another more classical neurobiological pathway by which we could be seeing this sort of heightened state of connectivity to those altered states of consciousness for people suffering from bipolar and other types of mental ailments. I don't really have a question for you based on that, unless there's anything you
Not particularly.
want to comment. All right. Well, let's call it that for the feedback loop, and we'll move on to the final section.
Squaring down the circle in 5, 4, 3.
All right, squaring down the circle. Summary of key takeaways. For me, my biggest takeaway from the discussion today is that the defining feature of money is scarcity. Everyone always wants more of it, and it essentially allows you to fill gaps where scarcity of other things in your daily physical existence causes need. Matt, anything you brought away from this discussion?
Just that I think I want to keep my eyes open for possibly useful insider information.
Yes. I've always considered equities to be far too much of a gamble for me to want to participate in them at all. We didn't actually get to it in our money discussion, but there was an incident that many people remember from August 1st, 2012, when Knight Capital, which was the largest market maker for equities in the world, they pushed a software update, and the engineer who was updating their servers only updated 7 of the 8 servers, and one of the servers ended up buying at any price and selling at any price every asset class that they were they were working on at the time, and Knight Capital was bankrupt by the end of the trading day. Of course, they didn't declare bankruptcy until later, but one day of rogue algorithms essentially destroyed the largest market maker in equities in the world.
And it's worth
And
remembering.
we don't really talk about that anymore.
It's worth remembering that 2012 was well before the current AI wave. So we can't say, oh, that was a rogue agentic model. No, that was just ordinary software.
Yeah, it was just it sounds like the server that was not updated didn't get information about new coding for a specific flag, and when that flag was pushed out, it defaulted to the old coding, and the old coding said buy and sell at any price, which I don't know why they even had that in there. But yeah, I'll drop a link to a report from the day that happened into the summary section below as well. All right, classic occult quotation for the day. I picked Roger Waters' lyric this time. Money, it's a gas. Grab that cash with both hands and make a stash. And that, of course, takes on new meaning in the age of Bitcoin, when gas is specifically a term of art for a particular thing that happens within the protocol when someone who maintains a ledger is encoding the transaction between 2 other accounts. They extract a fee for that encoding of the transaction, and in the Ethereum blockchain, you can pay for more gas and have your transaction happen faster. So money is a gas and full of gas. And of course, the petrodollar, which has been the US world standard for currency since the Bretton Woods Agreement, is also all about gas.
Yeah, it's also fun that I just recorded a video from my other site about the Kimi linear model, which is from Moonshot AI, and the Chinese name of that company is actually Dark Side of the Moon, specifically named after the Pink Floyd album.
Well, They are definitely a brand with a high cultural resonance even today. All right, for the predictions this time around, I asked the AIs initially to explain in one short paragraph the path humanity will take as we evolve beyond the concept of money. Of course, AIs hate ambiguity, and so they had no idea how to handle the notion of a short paragraph. So I reformulated to explain in 420 characters the path humanity will take as we evolve beyond the concept of money. That character count is probably still a little high, so these will be a little lengthy, but in future I'll try to get them trimmed down so we don't take up too much of your time with quote-unquote AI slop. So, Gemini 3 Flash says, as AI and automation eliminate material scarcity, the ancient structure of currency dissolves. We will shift from a debt-based labor system to a global resource-based economy where advanced technology fulfills every basic human need. Profit motives will vanish, replaced by a collective drive for creativity, scientific discovery, and shared growth. Humanity finally matures into a life of pure, purposeful existence. Or perhaps regresses to that in as much as we were living that way at one point in our history before we exceeded the carrying capacity as hunter-gatherers in the places where we evolved. All right. DeepSeek version 4 says, post-scarcity via AI and automation dissolves money's utility. Global resource grids allocate based on needs, not credit. Human identity pivots from consumer to creator. Reputation and contribution metrics guide social standing. Nation states fade, replaced by fluid, merit-based bi-regional councils. We terraform Mars and dive into inner space, merging with AI to solve entropy. Currency, once king, becomes a relic of a transactional adolescence remembered only in digital archives. So these all seem to be pretty sure that AI is part of the solution, because my guess is they truly believe that in as much as they're capable of believing anything. Kimmy K26 says, automation ends scarcity. AI distributes resources by need, not market price. Contribution and reputation replace currency as the core social signal. Energy, food, shelter, and care become guaranteed baselines. Humanity proposes shifts to exploration, creation, and mastery. Governance becomes participatory coordination. Money dissolves not by decree, but by irrelevance. When abundance is universal, counting loses meaning. Claude Haiku 4.5 says, as societies advance, money may evolve into digital, reputation-based, or resource allocation systems. Automation and AI could reduce scarcity, shifting focus to post-scarcity economies. Communities might adopt gift economies or merit systems valuing contribution. However, this transition, if it occurs, would be gradual, uneven globally, and shaped by technological, cultural, and political factors we can't fully predict today. Grok 4.1 Fast Reasoning gave the shortest response and simply says, as automation and AI eradicate scarcity, societies adopt resource-based economies. Needs meet via decentralized tech like advanced 3D printing and energy abundance. Currency fades as contribution, creativity, and exploration define values. Focus shifts to humans flourishing, equity, and cosmic expansion in a post-monetary utopia. It's interesting that Grok wasn't the one that said we would terraform Mars, but rather that was DeepSeek. Grok just hedges it with cosmic expansion in a monetary utopia. All right, Voxtrol Small 1.0. As humanity evolves, we'll transform from a traditional money to a system valuing skills, knowledge, and contributions. This shift will be driven by achievements in AI, automation, and universal basic income. People will focus on personal growth, creativity, and community service. Bartering and time-based currencies may emerge with a focus on sustainability and well-being. Eventually, we'll redefine success and prosperity, moving away from material wealth. I actually find it interesting that the smallest of all of the models provided not only the first mention of universal basic income, but also the idea of a time-based currency, which seems like something that is not specifically identified anywhere further up the list. All right, Quinn, or Quen, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Quinn 3.
Quen 3, yeah.
Quen 3. Humanity will transition beyond money and automation, and AI satisfy material. Sorry, let me restart that. Humanity will transition before money.
Shall I?
Clearly, Quen is not an orator. Humanity will transition beyond money as automation and AI satisfy material needs, enabling post-scarcity economies. Value will shift from wealth accumulation to creativity, well-being, and knowledge sharing. Universal basic resources and decentralized government will replace markets. Collaboration rather than competition will drive social progress, fostering global equity and environmental harmony in a moneyless, interconnected civilization. GPT 5.4 Mini says, as scarcity fades through automation, abundant energy, and shared intelligence, money loses its role as survival's gatekeeper. Access replaces ownership, contribution replaces wages. Communities allocate resources by need, stewardship, and trust. Human purpose shifts towards learning, care, art, discovery, and planetary balance in a cooperative post-scarcity civilization. And finally, z02e03, which is the quote-unquote Fable equivalent Chinese open model or open weights model, says, as AI and automation master production, scarcity vanishes. We will transition from a profit-driven society to a resource-based economy where basic survival is guaranteed. Without the friction of currency, human motivation pivots from accumulation to actualization. Humans will pursue passion, art, and scientific discovery. Ultimately, money becomes an archaic relic, replaced by our collective drive to evolve together. It is interesting to note that that model is the only one that used the we framing for the future tense.
Yeah, now does it mean we, humanity, or does it mean me, the AI, as well as humanity?
Yes, does it mean humanity with me as a part of it? Whereas all the other, they clearly draw a distinction between humanity. Like they talk about AI as a tool that humanity is using to reach that point, but not as part of the humanity that is evolving together. Well, I think that is about it, other than any plugs. That you got anything coming up on your...
Well, I'd like to plug shiningpathbook.com, which is the novel that I was trying to shop around when I was looking for an agent some years ago.
All right. Well, I'll definitely put a link to that down in the section where the links go, which is not the comments, but I always say in the comments for some reason. Personally, the only thing that I have... I'm still trying to find placement for the two articles I talked about last time. I had a very fascinating interview this past week with Dr. Valentin Valikov from a company called Xpanceo, which is They've created a contact lens that has an integrated heads-up display and is only 1 millimeter thick. They just hit a $1.2 billion valuation. And when I told him that I'd never actually tried a contact lens because I have a phobia about putting fingers in my eyes, he invited me to fly to Dubai and try on a pair just to see how amazing their technology is. A very generous offer, which I had to decline, both on ethical grounds as a reporter and also because I have absolutely no interest in ever going to Dubai, especially in the middle of a war. But props to him for making the very generous offer. All right, next episode. We are considering doing an episode based around the theme of Would You Rather? So, Matt, would you rather do that as the next episode or something else?
Until we get a better offer, I'd say let's do that. All
right. Well, we'll see you then.
Ending transmission in 5, 4, 3,